a permanent review or permanent reform committee. It can be done. I believe that a committee like this, I think you asked the question, it never existed before. What we used to do, and Mrs. McCullough used to do, we used to get stakeholders, different stakeholders, and get to the stakeholders. But Parliament, the parliamentary look at our proposals came from Parliament more or less in plenary. Never had this sort of specialist committee. This committee is a new thing, and I think that this committee could make it a mandate almost, whether it is half yearly or whatever, to have a review. Even, you see, you're driven now because you have a report, you have a ministry paper, but it should be a part of your man, because after all, this is the appropriations, right, and appropriations. And it is now also, unlike the PAAC, it's not a prosecutory, it's not a sort of catch you. I mean, I'd say not in a pejorative, it is in a constructive. So I think that would be a good driver. Now, one of the things is listening to Mr. Clarke. Information technology is going to drive this thing. And part of our backwardness is that we have never had the investment on a timely and, you know, the first time this thing struck me, I had a meeting when I was, you know, in Alcoa. And when these guys rigged up their system, they put up the contract and they were modifying the contract from Pittsburgh to Kingston, straight on the thing, and they were just going through the lines. And I went back to my office and I said, you know, we go back to our little hole, you know, and we have to then get every one of them is automatic. You go into every office. It is all rigged up, not only for PowerPoint and all that, but international contact. And what you're saying is that you could be in Beijing and participating in the thing. And we have never really brought this in. Now, one of our problems has been to finance it. And it takes novel means. Like, how do you finance this sort of technological inputs? When Pat had this executive agency thing, this $28 million allowed us to really go for broke. And when Mrs. Holness and the NLA, I was in London with them, the Jamaica Mutual had this meeting with Jamaica Community. And this man was complaining about his property in St. Anne's, southern St. Anne, and Mrs. Holness just took up the laptop and, you know, punched, and the man saw the man couldn't believe it. He was no longer interested in anything else. He proceeded to announce that we were advanced of Britain. So we thanked him for the exaggeration. But what impressed him was that with a laptop, we were able to just take up this thing and show the thing and began to solve his problems. So my feeling is a permanent, a continual just review every 6 months. Where are we? And all that. And I think that we need to engage these guys in the computer thing, because this, if you check it out, we have one of the most qualified, the public service is the most qualified in terms of academic degrees and that sort of thing, of any workforce in the society. It is, you know, it has really been upgraded. But without the tools of information and communications technology, and you're quite right, is a different thing from information, and that they shouldn't be clouded. There are two streams. But I think that a continuous review, this committee could be one. This committee is more likely because Parliament is, in fact, one of the things I didn't mention, one of the weaknesses of our state structure is that Parliament is really a Cinderella. Despite its power in voting and its power, it is really a Cinderella in the support structure given it. You don't see that in the UK. The committees in the UK or the committees in Canada, and not to mention the US Congress. You notice these guys when they're sitting down, you have behind them a whole lot of top brass. We have not, frankly, we have weighted our investment in the support to the executive at the expense of Parliament. And therefore, long-term, part of the reform of Parliament reform of the state has got to be a reform to make Parliament have, you guys come in, you know, you have constituencies, you don't have time to be pulling all these other things together. I mean, the British Parliament and the Canadian Parliament, and so that part of our reform of the system, of the state now, because the Parliament is a part of the state, is how do we support the Parliament with the technological breakthroughs, the critical staff, not many, but just critical staff that can support the committee work, because it will be too much of a burden. So, yes, your idea of in fact, one person put it in the paraphrasing Trotsky, you know, Trotsky, the communist. He said, permanent revolution. The person put it in the terms of permanent reform, because things are changing, technology changing, all sorts of, and it doesn't have to be expensive. And these guys will know, I mean, they have to market, but they will know options. I mean, take education. I was saying too, I think I'd run into you, that in the 1950s, the English were not among the most educated, although people out here thought so, because they weren't exposed as the Americans to higher education. And Harold Wilson, it cost him, introduced the Open University, where you could actually just watch your television and become an accountant and an engineer. It cost him in the sense that coal miners that used to vote labor without even looking became accountants and engineers and became part of the establishment and so on. But it educated people using that technology. That technology was just a TV. Now we have means of educating, means of health management, means of just management system. So yes, I think the proposal of a permanent reform review, but I would think that Parliament, this committee it puts the pressure, because if every 6 months you have to come in and give a status report, and you have these content sessions, because I mean, what I heard from the trade union today is some of the most thoughtful views of reform, not only as it affects the public service, but in the wider context. And Lloyd are at one, that the labor ministry has got to become an economic ministry. In America, you know, the labor ministry is an economic ministry. It is a member of the economic team. Our labor ministry has largely been an industrial relations and shown social support issues, but it has never. So when the Prime Minister calls the economic team, the last person he calls is the Labor Minister. If he happens to be around, he says, sit in, you know, but it's not, sit in if you, you know, have a cup of tea, you know, so.
You have to take into consideration that in the past, the ministry used to deal with these situations where they send labor force overseas. That is really dissipating, because the laws overseas keep changing, and this inward thinking for this new era we're going in. You talk about global change. There's this inward protective rules that are being laid out in many countries and regions now that is frightening, and for labor, they have to think about that. They have to think about that in this new paradigm shift. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Yes, members, a number of things have been raised. I think we all agree. This committee is the Public Administration and Appropriations, and we look